Welcome back to another reading and correcting with me, Kindar, the Tiger Knights, and Ty, the Tiger Supervisor. These are where I read a chapter from one of my stories and correct it as I go. If you want to listen to these live, it's every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time on Twitch. And if you are looking to support me, that is on my Patreon. Today we are doing chapter 42 of Breaking Step. Tibs threw on the tunic over his doublet in annoyance. He hated these clothes twice over now. Once, because putting them on meant he'd have to deal with nobles, Galdane's party this time. And a second time because Dawn had helped him get them. Probably just another step in his plan to make Tibs complacent and trust him until he no longer questioned what the sorcerer said or did. He kicked the chest. Why couldn't Dawn have been honest? Tibs liked the man he pretended to be, which had been the plan. He kicked the chest again. He should have known better. Dawn was nothing more than a self-serving asshole. He'd never change, which Dawn had confirmed multiple times now. Anytime he came into the inn, he had nothing but sneers for his team and the other runners there. He'd most certainly dropped all pretense of wanting to be better. Tibbs almost kicked the chest again. Instead, he snatched the overcoat from the back of the chair and put it on. He made a sheet of water. Then, instead of willing it still, he etched lines and filigree of fey. He didn't connect the lines, so the essence he fed into them didn't go anywhere, and Fey hardened it until the light and his image reflected off of it. There were distortions. The straight lines of his essence didn't directly correspond to a smooth surface. He looked. He pulled on the sleeve until they covered his bracers. Then he adjusted the doublet. He looked like a street urchin, hoping he'd fool nobles into thinking he was one of them. He wanted to rip the clothes off and put his armor on. He was a runner, not whatever his reflection claimed he was trying for. He was that okay. This should either be going for or trying to. Trying to be. That's what I'm going to it. Whatever his reflection claimed he was trying to be. He sensed for the reserve in his bracers and was comforted. Metal replaced fire to avoid the temptation to burn everyone down. It also let him use it without risking the accompanying change in his behavior. He hadn't worked out what he could etch with it, but it was still useful as essence made metal as protection. Okay, that doesn't. It was still useful as metal made for good protection. He forced his shoulder to unsag, and his reflection confirmed it didn't make him look much more than what he was. Still, he had an act to put on for the benefit of the guild, so he might as well get on with it. Where do you think you're going? The voice asked as Tibbs crossed the partially constructed wall. It ended on each side of the larger road, and half a hinge was already in place at chest height. The door that could close this way. That would close this way in. The door that would close his way in would be large. As would the other two, as would the two others, as other two, as would the other two. He'd survey the work in progress, and only the three largest road into the noble's neighborhood would allow entry, each set to have a door that could be closed and bar them from the rest of the town. Maybe Craggle Rock could bar the door on their side, and on their side, and never allow them to bother anyone. He faced the voice. An adventurer with fire as her element. Really? Why don't you... You know what? I don't like either, but... Sorry, I don't like your solution, but... He faced the voice, an adventurer with fire for her element, and somewhere between epsilon and delta in strength. That's probably what you want. He'd sensed her in the shadows cast by the lanterns hung on posts on each side of the door. On each side of the entry. There's no actual door yet. She stepped into the light. She stepped into the light, approaching. Her hand was on the pommel of the sword at her hip, and her armor was metal, scuffed and dented in places. But there wasn't much metal essence for as normal. There wasn't as much metal essence as was normal for as normal for what it looked like. Am I? It looked like. It felt to him as much of a costume as the clothes he wore, and would explain how she remained light on her feet. I'm expected, he told her. She snorted. I don't think anyone ever expects a thief to drop by their house. I'm a rogue, he said, and played the hunch. So they expect you to be a rogue too? She smirked. Like knows like, I see. And with water as your element, and water is your element. You know what? I'm going to make that a... And water is your element. I stopped peddling the guild's crap when I left them. Those titles are only to make you think the guild makes better than the rest of... Wow. Makes you better than the rest of us. We're thieves. There's nothing wrong with that. It's a, she chuckled, noble profession in and of itself. And yes, they know what they hired. Who better than a thief to catch other thieves? They aren't paying the guild for your service? I thought all adventurers had to work for them. Only until you pay off what they screwed you over with. And how about you head back the way you came and make your way back in where I won't see you and feel obligated to stop you. So there are ways to pay what you owe? Tibs asked, musing over the implication. I thought they made it so you never managed it. That they kept us in servitude for always unless you got some other group to pay your debt, like the academies do with the sorcerers and the attendant with anyone who has void. He'd considered what might happen if he'd dumped the coins he'd made from the sale on Tyrannia's desk, and I'd expected she'd make up lies to justify how it wouldn't be enough. This meant that if all he was interested in was his own freedom from the guild, all he'd need would be a way to acquire the needed coins. Yeah. All he had to do was find a way to acquire the needed coins. He suspected the guild wouldn't make that any easier than destroying it. I see you figured things out. You have to get creative, but it can be done. My name's Tibs, he said reflexively, and recognition sparked in her eyes. Tibs Lightfinger? Lightfingers? She looked him over. Yeah. He was surprised to know the lack of annoyance in his tone. When had he gotten used to the surname? He thought it had been because he was iced that he'd stopped hoping the town would forget about it. Do you know Galdane's house? It's the one with the slanted roof of dark red tiles, 4 windows on the top floor with the largest facing the rising sun, and has a balcony. The walls are so whitewashed they'll blind anyone walking by and have dark wood pillars that make it easy to climb. He'd surveyed it after Tyrannia told him which house the noble had bought. He'd been tempted to weaken the structure with corruption to keep them out, but all they would have done was buy a new house. Unlike the townsfolk, nobles had no problem spending coins on houses on houses they wouldn't use, or in the case of the family home Tibbs had burnt down, couldn't use. Now that he understood that buying a house didn't mean they paid all the coins for it they owed, and that they needed to continue paying that even if the house was destroyed, he had Darren looking for the ways Tibbs could fix that problem without bringing attention to himself. And do you know how to reach it from the ground, I mean? He shrugged. If I have to, I'll run the roofs to get there. That's a good way to get yourself shot. They have archers watching those. Tibbs rolled his eyes. They haven't noticed me all the previous times I ran those roofs. She studied him in a way that made him think he'd said too much. Can I go through? I figure they aren't going to be happy if I get there once the party's over. It was tempting. Tyrannia had said Galdane would never return if Tibbs wasn't in attendance. That would be one less noble to bother his town, and he wouldn't have to act like he enjoyed their company. But Tyrannia wouldn't be pleased, and that would make getting information out of her even harder. If only he had a justified reason not to be there. Where were the would-be assassins when he needed them? I'll escort you, she said. Make sure you don't get lost. He considered protesting. He didn't need a minder keeping him on the path, but while she was there, he could ask questions. Do any of the adventurers protecting the nobles work for the guild? I know I saw some of them acting as guards when Sebastian was causing trouble. I heard about the siege, she said in a serious tone that made Tibbs wonder how much and from where. Could the bard already be singing about it? I can't tell you about everyone the nobles are paying, but I doubt many will. Nobles don't care for the guild since it has more power than they do. I don't know what happened during the siege that took the choice away from them. Maybe the nobles became desperate, or, she smiled, those adventurers were being creative in how they got their money. If the guild doesn't know you were paid, it can't claim their cut of it. Doesn't the guild check for every coin where every coin comes from? Do they know what that with you? No, but do they do that with you? No, but I'm a runner. They know where my coins come from. He pointed over his shoulder at the mountain. She chuckled. What about the coins you get when you're not pillaging the dungeon? I don't get a lot, he said. Just one to prove I got into the house, and one or two extra to repay the people he hurt. But those didn't count, did they? That coin can still be worth a lot, she replied. One platinum from the noble's coffer will cover a chunk of what you'll end up owing. I only take silver. I'd take copper, but nobles don't seem to keep those. And it would take a lot more than an extra here and there to help the baker. Why just one? She asked in disbelief. You could take a pouch full and they wouldn't notice. Really? No. He reminded himself that what he took was only to prove it succeeded, and a little extra to help the town. He wasn't doing that to make his pouch heavy with coin. Do you steal from them? He asked. No, but I work for them. They pay me enough, it's not worth the risk. Trust me, the guild isn't going to care if you steal from nobles. Maybe not the guild. Have you met the guard leader? She shrugged. I've seen him come and go, but I haven't. Haven't met him. The commander will care if a noble complains someone steals from them, and he's going to make my life difficult because of it. Because you've been caught doing it before? She looked at him askance. Or because the city's thief report to you? They don't report to me, he replied. That's not what I hear. He looked at her. Word is, she lowered her voice, that if you don't clear your plans with light fingers, he's going to hand you over to the guards himself. I've never done that, he paused. She wasn't a runner, and she was causing trouble. She tried to have me caught for her theft. It was more payback than anything else by the time I made sure she was caught. They stopped. They stopped and she motioned. They stopped and I don't think they're. They stopped and she motioned to the guards, the guarded iron fence, a house over. Okay, why? I mean, they stopped, and she motioned to the guarded iron fence a house over, the walls reflecting most of the light from the glowing stones, while the beams seemed to vanish against the whitewashing. There it is. Story is he might have his children trained in the dungeon, in this dungeon. I've heard, Tibs grumbled. I won't disagree with the sentiment. It doesn't matter how well they pay. I do my best not to interact with them. Have a good evening. I promise to let you know if I decide to rob someone, she added as she walked away. Don't rob anyone, he called after her. You don't need the training. We always need to keep the fingers busy, light fingers. You know that. And now you'd have to worry about some Epsilon rogue causing problem. Later, he reminded himself. For now, he had a different set of trouble to deal with. He had to convince nobles he actually enjoyed their company. Where was that hibiscus assassin? Why hadn't he hired one in preparation for this? Huh. How did one go about it? How many coins would it take to get Marger killed? Light fingers? The guard asked as Tibs reached him. Yes. He forced himself to relax. The guard unlocked the gate with a key he produced from a pocket and opened it for him. Tibs eyed the stone wall, barely half again his height, as tall as he was, then the gate. What was the point of locking that when he could jump the wall without effort? There wasn't even a weave through those stones. Nobles. The glowing stones were set atop poles of finely decorated metal bands. Wait, no. The glowing stones were set atop poles by finely decorated metal bands. Those not placed along the winding path were among the landscape, illuminating a flower bed or next to a tree with a chair, or an arrangement of stone. Wherever a light was, a path broke from the main one leading to the from the one leading to the house in its direction. More broke to vanish in direction of light. Tibs couldn't see what they lit. The well-lit property would be the protection against someone who couldn't reach the house by the roofs. But if a rug could circumvent that, as well as the light stone anchored on each side of the door and windows at this level, then they would be able to find shadows higher, since no such light was arranged for the other floors. Maybe he should talk with Amelia about arranging this type of challenge for those he sent training through her house. She would probably advise using some other noble's home for that. Didn't know how he... May I have your name? The woman asked, standing in the open doorway. He'd sense her, with her faint essence, but had the door been opened? He wasn't certain, too lost in his thoughts. Tibs Lightfingers? If you'll come in, Mr. Lightfingers. She stepped out of the way. You are expected. The table at the side of the door had carved stones on it. Above was a mirror in a gold frame. The carpet that ran the length of the hall was had brightly colored shapes through it. There was a crowd on the other side of the wall to his left, and voices came from the archway halfway from the end on that side. He couldn't tell most of the people apart. A few had elements, but not much essence, and he had to focus if he didn't want to lose them among the rest. One stood out, earth element, epsilon in strength. You're here! Tibs froze. He'd been so focused on the essence he sensed he hadn't realized he'd reached the archway. Or that there was one opposite it and a man running at him from there. He had crystal as his element. Tibbs saw from the eyes as he ducked under the arm, fine clothing with gems adorning them. The expression had been joyful, so Tibbs fought the urge to make a sword as the man. Was he a man if he barely looked older than Jackal? Turned, his expression becoming surprise. You're fast. Surviving the dungeon ensures that, Tibbs replied cautiously. The boy, there was something boyish about him, despite looking older than Tibbs, wasn't armed. Only the knife in his boot, which had a weave through it, something loose, not powerful, with mainly metal essence. He sensed into the room on the right, but there was no one else there. I so can't wait for you to take me in. Tibbs swallowed his thoughts about that happening, but he couldn't stop his narrowing eyes. You shouldn't be eager to have the dungeon kill you, he said, instead of the thing that would make sure he'd get kicked out of the house. The boy waved the comment aside. He'll be there, so I'm not worried. He straightened. then gave a small bow. I am Lamberto of Fieschi. He grinned. Come on, the others are over there. Tibbs stepped out of reach when Lamberto tried to grab his arm, and the boy chuckled. Come on, Lamberto motioned as he ran for the left archway. Tibbs considered ice before following him, or possibly fire. All the nobles in that room made it a harder decision than he expected. He reminded himself of the monster ice turned him into, and that while nobles could burn, for all he cared, there were others in the house, servants who had no choice in being here, and not because they were looking to leech power from those around them. It was a good thing he didn't have fire in this bracer, he decided, as since without a worry about his emotions getting carried along with it would be too tempting when one of them looked at him like the street urchin he was. Releasing a breath, Tibbs stepped into the large, crowded room. Everyone, Lamberto proclaimed, and the conversation ceased as eyes turned in their direction. I would like you to meet the hero of Cragglerock, the savior of the dungeon, Tibbs Lightfingers. He'd made a mistake in taking the fire out of his bracer, Tibbs decided. He should have burnt the building down on sight and dealt with the guilt of the innocence he'd taken in the process. That would have been an easier thing to do than dealing with what the bleeping? Then dealing with what those hungry looks. Okay, that would have been an easier thing to do than dealing with what those now hungry looks promised. And that concludes chapter 42 of Breaking Step. If you are enjoying this, please leave a like. If you want to know when the next chapter will be up, subscribe and hit the bell. If you want to read the story, it is available for free on Royal Road. And if you want to support me and read ahead of that, that is on my Patreon. And if you want to listen to these live, it's every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time on Twitch. The links are in the notes, and with that, I shall wish you a good day.